Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to help you be able to answer a question that requires you to explain the need for traffic management in a developed world city, as well as being able to comment on the effectiveness of the solutions. Typical question will look a little bit like this. You might get some kind of resource. In this case, there's a resource for Glasgow. Whenever you're given a resource from a city, don't be fooled into thinking you have to talk about that city. The question does say for Glasgow or any named developed world city you've studied. Describe and explain schemes which have been introduced to reduce problems of traffic. Now, in this case, there's no requirement to evaluate, but I will deal with evaluating at the end of this answer to give you some pointers on how you might evaluate this. Okay, so the first thing you've got to establish is you might get a question before here worth maybe 6 marks or so, which asks you to describe the problems related to traffic. Now, if I just quickly run through them in the context of London, the problems for traffic in London are that people spend more than an hour a day commuting, which can lead to high levels of stress and result in poor health. They also can't work whilst commuting, so there's an economic impact because there's a loss of earnings. Second problem is the air pollution in London is the worst in the United Kingdom, so people's health is being affected, as is the environment in general. Third thing, there's severe overcrowding on the public transport system, leading to health related issues for people who are trying to navigate that public transport every day. Another problem is because a lot of people choose to cycle in London, it's very dangerous because of the amount of cars on the road competing with cyclists, and it's led to many cyclists either being killed or being severely injured, which then has an impact on the healthcare system of the city. Because commuting is a daily requirement of most people in London, it costs a huge amount of money. It's second highest in the world, as a matter of fact. So Londoners are having to spend a lot of their income on commuting around the city to get to work every day. So there's some descriptions, some sort of key, 5 key sort of points that you can mention. You could also talk about noise being severe, linked to traffic, which disrupts people's peace and quiet, as well as a 6th idea if it was a 6-mark question. So what I do now is pause the video and run through those 6 points and quickly note them down so you could discuss what the problem is. Now let's explore the solution and some evaluations. Okay, the first solution in London comes from the use of the congestion charge, where people spend £11.50 a day if they wish to enter this central zone of London. Now that's describing it. To explain it, what it does is it encourages people to not bring their car into the centre of London because of the cost. And therefore requires them more likely to want to use public transport. Now, public transport has a much lower impact on the environment than using the cars. And if you're to evaluate this on a positive side, it's seen a massive drop in pollution levels in the city centre, making the city centre cleaner. Congestion has reduced substantially, therefore traffic flows much easier in the city centre, which has had an economic advantage for businesses in the city centre. However, the cost means that it's really only people who are wealthy can pay for it, and they're quite happy to pay for it because they have the money, but it unfairly disadvantages poorer people who can't afford £11.50 a day, and therefore it's not a universally fair tax on vehicles, so that's a negative. Okay, if we move to a second solution, these are called the Santander Bikes. They're more commonly known as the Boris Bikes, and these are bikes that you can rent for the amount of time you use them, just using a credit card or prepaid card that you swipe, and it frees up the bike, and you can then cycle it anywhere in the city and lock it down at another location. This encourages people not to use cabs for short journeys, rather use their bikes, which is obviously much more environmentally friendly, and it also helps with the health of the people doing so. On the downside, if you're to evaluate this, the negative of the Boris Bikes is that you tend to get some areas where there's lots of them, destinations like tube stations, Whereas other areas across the city where people pick up the bikes but don't return them, there's often not any available. So it's very much, you can turn up at a place where you think they're going to be available and there are none available, and you end up having to grab a cab. Okay, the third solution is the Crossrail solution, which is a rail link that takes you right across London from the eastern side to the western side. Most of the route is underground, and it hooks up with a lot of the major areas of London. So, for example, we've got the Docklands area down here. We've got the whole centre of London in this area here. We've got the airport, and it actually heads out west, going all of the way to Reading. Now, the purpose of the Crossrail was to make across London transport much quicker, and it increased the capacity of the London rail network by about 10%. So we can see this down here. It's actually called the Elizabeth line. That's the name of the Crossrail. So there's been a 10% increase in public transport. It can carry 1.5 million people a year, and it's connecting some of the major areas of London, like the Canary Wharf zone with central London with the airport. Whereas before people would have had to use the London Underground or make 2 or 3 changes on their way between key locations in the city. Crossrail allows you to come in and across London very quickly without needing to use existing transport networks. So it's to evaluate it, it's been highly successful in increasing the capacity of the Underground and reducing congestion on the existing London Underground. On a downside, it's cost billions of pounds of taxpayer money, and it's really only benefited Londoners, even though it's the whole of the United Kingdom that's paid for this huge transport. We can see here it's cost 40. Oh, sorry, that's a positive. On a positive, they do reckon that the increased speed of transport across the city should add something in the order of 42 billion to the economy of the UK in terms of improved house building and jobs it's going to help create. Okay, cycle lanes. Now, London's seen a big explosion in cycling. The reason for that is people like to be able to avoid congestion, so more and more people using their bikes, but it has led to a lot of fatalities. So across London, they built lots of these dedicated cycle lanes for cyclists only. This helps, makes them much safer, so cyclists are less likely to get hurt, and it also speeds up cyclists getting from A to B. On a positive side, it's seen a reduction in fatalities, and it's an increase in people cycling, if you were to evaluate it. On a negative side, it's led to a lot of road being used up for cycle lanes, which has reduced the capacity of the existing network for cars. Okay, bus-only lanes have been built right across the city. The aim here is to increase the speed of buses because they have their own lane and they don't have to fight through traffic. They don't have to compete with other vehicles. It means that because they get to A to B much quicker, people are more likely to use them. And that means if more people are using buses, they're less likely to be using cars, which increases the flow of traffic because there's less cars on the road, but also at the same time, therefore, reduces the amount of pollution. It has seen a big increase in public transport use, and it has sped up the transport system in London. So the positive has been that the public transport travels fast and therefore more people are using it. However, it has led to congestion on the buses. It's been so popular, buses in London now, that many buses are not big enough to carry the number of people. And it has, unfortunately, in narrow city central areas, reduced road capacity and worsened traffic congestion. Okay, moving on to Oyster cards. These are introduced to increase the flow of people at tube stations and reduce the congestion at ticket desks. It allows you to get onto the Underground really quickly, and it's all prepaid. It has sped up the transfer of people across the Underground, and it's helped reduce queues. There isn't really a negative of the Oyster card. It's the speeding people through the system has had a huge benefit, and it means more people are likely to use the Underground because it's more convenient to use. And finally, we've got the introduction of the low emission zone, which bans all high polluting vehicles, especially diesel vehicles, from entering the central area of London. We can see this area here, it incorporates the whole central zone. This has helped reduce the amount of dangerous particulate matter, which in the long term should help with some of the problems related to pollution, especially in regards to human health. The fact that London has some of the worst health problems related to air pollution. So a lot of vehicles are now having to change. That on the negative, a lot of businesses that deliver goods into London have had to change their